Our next speaker, his claim to fame is he wrote a book along with a couple of others called The Veil of Evolutionary Psychology. You might remember that he pioneered the field of evolutionary psychology with the book The Adapted Mind as well. He is the director for the Center for Evolutionary Psychology at UC Santa Barbara, and he's well known for discussing and researching the evolution of sex and why some organisms are asexual and some are sexual. He came up with the answer that sex is a defense against parasites. I thought it was just good fun. John Tooby.
Thank you. Thank you. The sex work was, what, 30 years ago or something? So, but in parasite time, that's actually like comparable for mammals. That's the dawn of the or the extinction of the dinosaurs. So a lot has happened in their world since then. Okay, so the overall argument I'm going to make is that if we look at the single broadly intelligent system we know, which is to say the human brain, and we come to understand it, that if we look at the design principles that natural selection has used to achieve whatever intelligence we have, that will help break the deadlocks which artificial intelligence has been suffering under. Okay, so, but before that, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be among the intellectually adventurous for a change. Normally, I'm on a campus, and so it's not such a common experience. And also, it's a nice experience to be the, at least seemingly not the most extreme thinker in sight. And just for those who are prudent and cautious in the way they think about things, I'd just like to point out that although there are good grounds to be skeptical, I mean, the lack of striking progress in artificial intelligence over the last 50 years, gives some grounds for being skeptical that we're going to achieve it anytime soon. Nonetheless, if you look at the history of science, well, if you look at most social disputes, the truth, because people are self-interested and there's two sides, people are exaggerating on both sides, the social heuristic people use is the truth must lie somewhere between the two endpoints, right? Somewhere in the middle. In the history of science, however, always the universe is stranger than we think. Always the truth lies outside the farthest bounds of what the most extreme scientific proponent of a given time period said. So when Galileo said, well, the universe is thousands of times bigger than anybody knew, okay? Well, that was a grotesque underestimate, right? And when geologists said, well, the Earth didn't really begin 6,000 years ago. It was a bit longer than that, right? Okay, so that was a huge underestimate. And even if you look at, something like quantum mechanics, Max Planck, who originated, introduced that kind of analysis, he thought it was just, it was wrong, and it was something he worked very hard to get rid of, because he wanted to get back to continuous quantities. And Einstein, of course, famously also, reached his limit. And so, in a universe with black holes and, quantum tunneling and all sorts of stuff, the truth is really quite a bit beyond what anybody suspects. So, so maybe maybe artificial intelligence, which is really powerful, will appear relatively soon, and we will have no concept of what that might mean. Okay, so if it comes really soon, then my life's work will be pointless because it will be replicated in the first 14 nanoseconds. Okay, so on the off chance that that's not going to happen in the next year, okay, So my goal, what I've been working towards is, over the last several decades, I and my collaborator and wife, Lita Cosmides, and originally with a few other people, we thought that all the pieces were now in place to really seriously attack, to begin to realize the Enlightenment project of a natural science of humans. And that implicitly, sort of, the scientific community really gave up on that for a long period of time. And we have the social sciences, which people think are that, but nobody really expects them to be anything like a natural science. But I think that the science of humans can be like a natural science, can be a natural science, is a natural science. And see, that was like a little rapid singularity right there. Okay. From could be like to is. Anyway, that because finally all the different pieces, the constituent sort of, dimensions of the scientific problem now fit together and we understand them. Advances in computer science, advances in evolutionary biology being the two chief things which really unlock things, but all sorts of other things too. Serious paleoanthropology, serious hunter-gatherer studies, and so on. So when you take these pieces and you integrate them, it just opens this door on the first ability to seriously enter into the human brain and map at a computational level the constituent pieces of programming that constitute human nature. So the goal of evolutionary psychology is the discovery and construction of high-resolution maps of the circuit logic of each of the, and here we don't really know the number, and there's a certain arbitrariness of lumping and splitting, but an unexpectedly large number of specialized instincts, adaptive specializations, mechanisms, whatever you want to call them. And that in aggregate, these make up the architecture of the human brain. So a lot of people are on board with the following distinction I'm going to draw, but just so we're all clear, that there's really two different ways of approaching the human brain and as an object of study. And one is to study it as a physical system. And you take physical measurements and you have fMRI and, what's the, what cell populations project to where, and so on. And from that perspective, as a physical system, it's an amazingly vast system, a dauntingly vast system. And when people don't know what are the relevant interactions, there's lots of things happening in there. And some of them are going to be relevant to things we want to know. And lots of others are just going to be byproducts which aren't relevant to anything. And then there's a different way of approaching it, which is computationally, which is a specifiable set of information processing relationships. And what in Marr's terminology would have been an algorithmic level. And this you investigate with logic probes, so to speak. That is, information going in, and you see how it's operated on, how it's transformed into information coming out, regulating behavior. Okay, so you're reverse engineering software programs, or programs, so to speak. And that is a much more tractable project because the reason why the brain exists is because the brain is an information processing device. It's the reason why it exists. So when you are mapping it in the computational level, you are approaching it at the level of its functions. And so what you're seeing are not byproducts. What you're seeing is the real stuff of why the system is there. And you can make sense of the system. Okay, so why emphasize evolution? Why not just say there's psychology or there's cognitive science, mapping computationally, and then there's neuroscience, mapping in physical sense. And it's a remarkable cultural feature of the development of the behavioral, cognitive, and brain sciences over the last century that until very recently, and still for, I would say, the great majority of this community, evolution is treated as a black art, which it's better not to dabble in. And so why do we emphasize evolution? Well, we know from physics, I started out in physics, entropy is the great attractor, that organized systems tend towards increasing disorder. Okay, so when you go out into the universe and you find highly organized systems, they require explanation, and you want to know how it is that this remarkably improbable system or set of systems came into existence and why. And natural selection is the only known physical process, aside from intelligent intervention, that can push systems uphill against entropy towards greater functional organization. So natural selection acts as a filter on biological structure. And the only kinds of structures that it builds, functional structures that it builds, are those that solve evolutionarily recurrent adaptive problems. Okay? It has to be natural selection which produced the system, and therefore natural selection acts in a certain set of ways to create a certain peculiar, non-intuitive set of functions. Okay? And that's the only thing you're going to find in the brain, unless it was specially created by somebody. Okay, so all better than random functional organization in the human brain consists of problem-solving systems that are engineered to conform to design specifications reflected in the adapted problems posed by natural selection operating in ancestral task environments. Okay, and as Einstein said, the point being that unguided empiricism, not having a theoretical model of what you're looking for or what you're likely to find, there's an infinite number of measurements you can take, and you'll just never get anywhere. And a huge amount of, millions of man-years of research, person-years of research over the last, century, really didn't produce very much because nobody was thinking, the kinds of hypotheses people entertained were not the ones that were likely to apply to a brain produced by natural selection. And so Einstein said it's the theory that decides what we can observe. That is, if you have a theory, you design your experiments or your empirical research to be able to test and to see, okay? And if you're wildly wrong about what's out there, then your measurements won't tell you what, they won't stumble across the things you need to be measuring, okay? So the ancestral world posed a series of problems, adaptive problems, that had to be solved successfully to survive and gene replicate. And so if you take specific adaptive problems, things like navigation for a mobile organism, or mating, or foraging, or negotiation in conflicts of interest, or dealing with genetic relatives, each of these is a sort of, is this kind of structure, of cause and effect structure, which favors some designs over other designs. And you can formalize that as an adaptive problem, and then you can use that to think, well, what kinds of programs would be useful in solving that kind of adaptive problem? And then you can design your research to much more productively. So it's not the case that we always find what we're looking for, but it's really, very often that you find something, approximating what you thought might be there, if you have a model of the kinds of adaptive problems that our ancestors, if you're studying humans, had to solve. Because the structure of the adaptive problem selects for a program with design features that mesh with the adaptive problem to produce an adaptive solution. Regular behavior, in the case of the brain, that in fact is a good bet or a best bet to solve the adaptive problem. And so there's a reflection between the adaptive problem and the adaptive solution. And so you can go looking for the computational structure by, you know a lot about it. You can design your program if you understand the adaptive problem, okay? Like a lock and key problem and solution. And there's just a huge amount of adaptive structure out there, and it's very sensitively dependent on the evolutionary history of the organism, so you get enormous diversity of outcomes, but they're all extremely improbably well organized to having a little bit of, oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. Don't know if we skipped something, but anyway, evolutionary psychology, it's basically a 5-step research program. You identify an enduring adaptive problem, for humans, for our hunter-gatherer ancestors. You do a Marrian task analysis, what Marr would have called a computational analysis, but a theory of what computation has to achieve. And you derive hypotheses about the likely structure, what the system would need. And then you test these hypotheses, empirically. And, our experience actually has been, there's a lot of question about, well, how good is natural selection? And in system after system, we found that we've underestimated how well designed the system is for a given adaptive problem. Anyway, but sometimes you're wrong, right? So anyway, that's why you do experiments. And then the next step is once you have a model of the computational architecture of a given thing, then you can go looking for the neural basis, the developmental and genetic bases, ideally. And another thing we do is that if it's something is, there's lots of entropy in the universe in genetics and so on. So evidence that you're pretty far away from entropy is when something is species typical. And so long-term adaptations from the long-term structure of the world are going to tend to be, not always, but tend to be species typical. And so therefore, for humans, we cross-culturally test and see if you get the same computational architecture in different locations, the same pattern of inputs and outputs. And we have a field site in the Ecuadorian Amazon where we do, and there's other places too. Okay. And, okay, so just a brief rant that it really does astonish me. I was going to be a physicist. I was on track to being a physicist, but I was interested in applying evolution. I thought that the psychologists must be using evolution. And I was really interested in computer science, so I thought, well, I'll go over and take a course in cognitive psychology. This was in 1970. And I was completely flabbergasted to discover that evolution played almost no role in social and behavioral sciences. And not only that, but it was viewed as there's a long tradition of arguing against its application. And it was viewed as some kind of pollutant, as I said, a black art to not be touched. And I was flabbergasted then, and I thought, well, here's something that, I could usefully do. And, but the question then, which, haunts me to this day is, why would anyone choose voluntarily to leave out of their thinking something they knew was true and important about a system they were studying? And so I get the question all the time, well, couldn't you have derived that hypothesis without thinking about natural selection or evolution? And, well, I don't know, I conceivably sometimes maybe, usually not. But anyway, even if you could, it's like saying, well, could you have done your scientific research without ever using any math? Well, maybe I could stand on my head on the top of a pole, but why would you bother? Okay. And so there's this really remarkable feature about scientific progress, which is that it doesn't proceed at the speed of thought. It doesn't proceed at the speed of inference, which is, then we'd see scientific discoveries and integration of new ideas and stuff happening on a matter of minutes or hours or days or weeks. Okay. Instead, it proceeds at a sociological pace or even a demographic pace. So Max Planck was famous for saying science progresses funeral by funeral. So you don't change people's minds, they just die, okay? And then you colonize the minds of the younger generation, okay? That's really a stupid way to have science proceed. And anyway, so if there is a powerful AI that comes along, then I can say, tell them, okay? And, okay, anyway, so I'm just going to do an example that will illustrate some of the themes about how maybe learning from the only known aspect of intelligence that we know about the human mind can teach us lessons about how to proceed perhaps more profitably with AI. And so there's a cluster of adaptive problems involved in recognizing genetic relatives and treating them differently in the domains of altruism and also sex, incest avoidance. Okay? And this work was done in collaboration with our student, Deborah Lieberman. And if you're interested in it, we have a recent publication in Nature about this. Anyway, so there's two distinct adaptive problems. One is our old friend entropy produces deleterious recessives. Producing children with somebody who shares closely ancestry with you increases the frequency with which those deleterious recessives are expressed, because they meet up much greater than probability than by chance. So that's inbreeding depression, and that would select for incest aversion. And the other completely different adaptive problem is a gene can cause its own spread, not only by causing greater reproduction in the individual it's situated in, but also by causing greater reproduction in others that carry that same gene, which are likely to be genetic relatives. And so there's a trade-off between how much of the fitness of an individual should, how much fitness to trade off self to other. And this is the theory of kin selection. And anyway, the point is, both of these different adaptive problems need a certain kind of information in common. To be able to avoid genetic relatives, you need to know who they are. To be able to differentially help genetic relatives, to be motivated, to be more altruistic towards them, you need to know who they are. And by you, I mean a huge amount of these systems, almost all of these systems are non-conscious. So it's not as if I'm talking about any kind of awareness of these phenomena. It's just things that incline you to feel like, loving your family more than a random stranger, or being disgusted at the prospect of sex with them. Okay. These two problems require the same information, identifying genetic relatedness, and you can think there'll be a variable in the head for, a familiar other, and there'll be a non-conscious variable which summarizes an estimate of how close a genetic relative they are. We call that the Kinship Index. And so if you have a high Kinship Index, somebody has a high Kinship Index, the brain computes that downregulates in you sexual attraction towards them as against what it would otherwise be. And if a high Kinship Index also has this other output, which is it increases the weight you put on their welfare compared to your own. Okay, the engineering problem is you can't see relatedness. The brain needs to, these programs need to detect cues of relatedness, and the looking, at the causal and statistical structure of the ancestral world leads to predictions about what maybe those cues might be. And I would claim that, in contrast, domain general learning, just a general intelligence system, would not be able to solve this problem because local transient cues, which might in this environment be highly informative, you can't learn what they are, because to know which cues are in fact predicting relatedness, you'd have to already know who was related to you. You'd have to already know the answer to the problem. And so there's huge amounts of data that are relevant to relatedness, which you would expect the system would be paying no attention to, because it will vary environment by environment, and there's no necessarily cross-environmental information which would tell you which. Okay, so the alternative is that that natural selection sifts for those cues which are reliable generation after generation. Okay, and one of them, I recognize that people wouldn't, I would claim this is a piece of intelligence. Other people might not like that terminology, but anyway, one cue is what we call maternal perinatal association, which is if you observe your mother taking care of a neonate, you're a hunter-gatherer, that person is almost certainly your sibling. And so the Kinship Index observation of that sets the Kinship Index high. Okay, but there's a problem. So that's one hypothesis. But even if that hypothesis were true, it can't be a general solution to the problem, because if you're a younger sibling, you weren't around when your older sibling was born and young and being nursed, right? So you couldn't have observed that. So if you're a younger sibling, you need another cue. So Westermarck proposed that, at least in early childhood, duration of childhood co-residence might, in fact, he didn't have the whole story about genetics and this, but it was a suggestion about where incest aversion comes from that he proposed. He was the first Darwinian sociologist, anthropologist. Anyway, and he was widely ridiculed by Freud, even though he's in fact completely correct. Okay, ancestral structure of the world, the fusion-fission structure of bands and foraging. Children stay with their mothers, especially, and So therefore, if there's something, like the Verizon man inside your head that says, am I with this person now? Am I with this person now? Am I with this person now? And it sums that up from we predicted it would be, until the child starts to have independent ranging patterns where they're no longer economically dependent on the parents. So the period of parental investment around 16 or 18 is when that would terminate. And so that's a secondary cue. And anyway, I can see I'm not going to have time to really describe the project, but there's a lot of converging evidence, extremely different variables about disgust towards sex with people, how much you like them, how much you will help them, that all these things look as if they're regulated by the same cues. And in fact, the two cues I've described. We tested for a large number of other cues, and after you controlled for these two cues, they didn't contribute anything. And so this is what the system looks like. At the front end, there's co-residence monitoring and maternal perinatal association. And together, those feed into a kinship estimator. But once again, the theme here is intelligence is achieved by throwing away information that would otherwise choke the system as too complicated. And so here, maternal perinatal association is a more reliable cue. And so if you have that, you don't pay attention to co-residence. So older siblings, co-residence contributes nothing to their level of disgust with somebody for sex or their level of altruism. It's maternal perinatal association which controls, okay? If you're a younger sibling and you lack MPA, so this is called the non-compensatory cue system, okay? So it's even within the information that the system is designed to use, it doesn't always use all the information. It looks at the most reliable information, okay? And then you have the kinship index that's computed, and it feeds into a welfare trade-off. So we have evidence about underlying motivational system for welfare trade-offs for people. Many things cause that, but kinship is one. And then that outputs the program's guide, affection, love, whatever the sort of networks are that control altruistic behavior. And in the other direction, kinship index downregulates the sexual value of somebody to you. And in fact, mediated by disgust. Okay, so that's a map that we have evidence for all the components of. It could be that there's a variable or two we haven't found, but they would have to be relatively weak or we'd have evidence of them. And I want to point out that one thing that AI systems have trouble with is they try to make, belief consistency is something which is a problem, okay? Here in a modular system, there can be information in some subsystems which just isn't output in a form that other systems pick up, okay? So here, people also have explicit beliefs about kinship, but wherever their explicit beliefs about their kinship, about their relatedness to people, conflicted with the inputs they got from co-residence or MPA, it was the evolved system, non-conscious system that prevailed in predicting their attitudes, okay? Okay. Okay, that's just, I'm not going to have time for this, but we've mapped a number of different devices. This is one where we actually, why is it that people encode race and are racially aware? And it turns out it's a byproduct of the fact that there's an alliance detection system from, which is an important system in small social groups. And it trains the perceptual system, the memory system, to differentially attend to cues that predict coalitional alliance. And so if you create an environment in which race, for example, or anyway, race as an example, no longer predicts coalitional alliance, it stops being encoded, or it stops being an organizing principle in memory, okay. So you could make people non-racially aware. Anyway. Too much animation. Okay. Okay. So there's lots of applications that so this natural science is gathering momentum, and I think there'll eventually be a broad array of applications and technologies that come out of it. So people are very concerned about racism, for example, and there's but anyway, for the purpose of this conference, for AI, there's, I think, a number of lessons that we can derive from different systems. First, this is just a throwaway line, but a really important aspect, if we are going to develop strong AI, you want it to understand what humans want and also to value what humans want. But just to understand it, it has to have a good model. It has to have a map. It has to have maps of the computational specializations in the human mind in order to interpret requests. So if we request, yeah, please help us achieve a population which is sustainable, and the system says, zero population will be completely sustainable, right, forever, right? Okay, that would be a problem. So you want the AI system, so a real evolutionary psychology, a real inventory of the mechanisms in there will be necessary to be inside the system. Okay, anyway, but more importantly, in terms of getting there, what is intelligence going to look like, how to get there, and I'm not really fond of the term broad or general intelligence because I'm not sure it's a coherent concept that I'm much happier with. So humans strike us as broadly intelligent, right? And so I think broad is a matter of degree, anyway, our speaker yesterday, Demis Hospice, he hit some of these themes that I'm going to talk about today. But anyway, if we understand in a computationally explicit way how the human brain achieves intelligence, this knowledge, we can see the hacks that are allowing and the principles that allow humans to be, however handicapped, intelligent we are, as intelligent as we are. Okay. And we have to know what intelligence is, and I don't think this is very inconsistent with what previous speakers said, but I would say intelligence is computational organization that solves problems, and that kicks the problem. What do you define as a problem? But anyway, which I will duck for the moment. And there's really two kinds of intelligence intuitively. One are what we call dedicated intelligences, which are specialized intelligences, which have a defined target problem set, and the thing is, specialized, tailored to do that set of problems well, even though it won't really help you or may even hurt you or be irrational if applied outside of that domain, okay? And that the human brain is full of those things, dedicated intelligences. And then there's, improvisational intelligence, and humans, as opposed to other species, look like they have something like that, which is, looks like general intelligence. It improvises solutions to problems not encountered before, problems not sampled from a predefined set. And that's what we're looking for AI, or what people think they're looking for. But true general intelligence, what does it really need? Well, the universe is immensely large, not to mention the set of possible universes. And it's, immensely large, immensely small, scales, immensely slow, immensely fast, ancient, intricate. It's causally very dense. And the only system which, in fact, successfully replicates all the information, all the relationships in the universe is the universe itself, okay? And that's just a bit too big to fit in our brains. It's a bit too big to fit in our laptops or our servers. And so useful intelligence is all about reduction, okay? It's what are ways we can massively carve away information that to solve a set of problems we don't need, okay? And focus on just the kinds of things which efficiently get us to a solution, okay? And the more general a system is, the more general, set of problems it can solve, the more, a completely unbounded set of problems, it needs to have, an infinite amount of information. And that leads to anything, just baby steps towards that, leads to all the traditional problems of AI, combinatorial explosion and frame problem and qualification problem and, frequent encounters with intractability. So natural intelligences work just in a completely different way. They avoid these problems by throwing away stuff and finding pinpoint strategies which radically collapse the information needed to be considered in order to solve a predefined target set. They break off biologically important tiny fragments of the universe like genetic relatedness or predator-prey relationships or color constancy. We did a lot of work on reasoning about social exchange. Anyway, in engineering different problem-solving methods for each, okay? And so evolution can find what's, these brilliant hacks, shortcuts that really work extremely well. And these native intelligences are dramatically smarter than general intelligence because of these shortcuts. So we didn't, over the course of evolution, encounter a random distribution of problems drawn from the set of all possible problems. Instead, the ancestral world was clustered and bombarded us with, narrow sets of problems that recurred over and over again. So the traditional model of how general intelligence would be achieved is to use reasoning methods or inferential methods which could apply to the set of all problems. And to do that, you must take away anything from a strategy. Take away anything from a strategy that wouldn't apply to other problem sets. And so what that means is you're progressively weakening the system's ability to solve problems by only resorting to problems strategies which apply across a larger set or all problems. And these are content-independent, domain-general, rational methods. And I'm going to leave aside the formal argument, but that I'd say it's a formal argument that the more general the system, the weaker the problem-solving ability. The more general the intended set of procedures, the weaker they will be at solving problems. And so this is instead, you can solve problems efficiently if the world has a structure, and so you don't need to replicate all the structure of the world inside the system, or you don't need to prepare the system for all possible universes. You just need to, in fact, find something that will solve your problem in the domain. So, but that's, well, is that very good at all? What good or specialized intelligence is what we want is a general intelligence, right? So here I would say that the way humans have done it, and the way, in fact, you might productively reach general intelligence is by something you might call a sort of combinatorial mosaic intelligence, which is you get increasing scale not by stripping away stuff which is special for one thing, but instead by bundling together dedicated intelligences, and so that they cover, and you put together whatever general systems you can have in matrix of interfaces, so that the scope of the intelligence broadens by each specialization you add to the aggregate system. And so it gets bigger and bigger by the addition of specializations, not by the, And I won't talk about social exchange and the difference between content specialized logics and content general, because I don't have time, but that it's just a very different, and so I'll just sum up here, it's a very different AI research strategy where you develop an ever larger battery of dedicated intelligences plus whatever general things are useful, and to augment the system, you say, I'm going to pick something some domain where I see that here, a little bit of inference, in fact, will get you to solutions in this large area, and then you add that to the system, And so that looks a lot like work, but it's progressive, and each additional narrow intelligence you build will be economically useful. And anyway, so I'm going to stop there, and thank you.
Don't have time. All right, I'll let it happen.
And I think we have no time for questions, or?
We have time for one question, again. And I think this guy over here is rising to the occasion, unless anyone can beat him to the microphone. No, okay, he's leaving. All right, there we go. There we go.
John, how about some, for us beginners, I know Steve Pinker loves your stuff. For the rest of us, can you give us some white papers or references on the internet to bring us up to speed?
If you go to the Center for Evolutionary Psychology, which is where Steve comes often to write his books, our website, there is a publication list page, and we try to put up what we have there. And so there's basically whatever there is on our website.
And how would you answer, I'm guessing that the most frequent possible critique that you get is, well, isn't it a just so story and after the fact?
Yeah, so that's an extremely common accusation, and so we have strong evidence that people don't learn because the response to that is essentially all the work we do. We start with a theory of the adaptive problem, and we predict the existence of mechanisms which nobody knew the existence of, and then we see if they're there. And so none of that. So nobody would know about the cheater detection system or the system for detecting maternal perinatal association or the alliance detection system if we hadn't done work that experimentally mapped them and shown that they existed, right? So you can't say something is post hoc if it wasn't known before the fact. And it is true that there's a perfectly valid method afterwards. So all cosmologists, all geologists, they start with known phenomena, or largely with known phenomena, and they try to think, well, how could that have happened? And it's a perfectly legitimate thing, and sometimes people in evolutionary biology do that too. It's weak if your data set is not any larger after you, or none. But so even stuff that's in the past, if you didn't know it was true or there, you could predict, a feathered reptile, for example, and then people could discover it. But anyway, so people don't. The people like that accusation, and they don't listen to the answer. Yeah. So I guess we're done, or
Yes, we're done.
okay.
But yeah.
Thank you. I'll be around.